Service level verification tests. They are a series of network tests that you can run from the Uplogix, to monitor and benchmark your network performance. So we have part of that suite of 3 different tests. There's the Ipt Telephony Test. We have TCP Syn Act testing and HTTP testing. So, web pages, any arbitrary service or IP telephony calls. And all of those rules, all of the service level verification tests, they're just like our monitors in that they they collect a bunch of data that is then available for the rules engine to interact with. So this is a licensed feature, the Slv tests. If you might end up having to select which systems that's turned on for. And then once you've got that license in your system selected, you can then configure and run those tests either from the CLI or from the web interface. So, talking about the 3 different types of tests, right? We have the HTTP test, right? And that just sends out a request to a specified URL. So that might be, an internal, web page, a wiki kind of thing, or, internal resource that users or customers need, or, doctors, patients, that sort of thing. Or it could be external too, right? If you have a server that you need to verify the availability of. When we do that test, we collect, how long it takes us to connect, time to first and last byte, total bytes received, and then, any response messages you might get. So if you request a page that's been moved or if it's not available and you get a, 404 error or something like that, we record that into the database as a result of that test. So, you can use it, like I said, to verify that, web interfaces are available, but you can also use it as a network benchmark test. And also, to verify that DNS is up and working because, that'll be part of the web test if you use a host name rather than an IP. So, but also, we've had people who they'll stage a 5 megabyte file somewhere, and then they use this test to benchmark their actual network performance. Because it's a file of a known size, they can benchmark, how long it takes to download that, and based on that, you can then use rules to alarm if it goes over certain thresholds. So that's the web test. We also have the TCP Syn Act Tests, and you just specify a IP and a TCP port, and we just test our ability to reach that. If we get a acknowledge from whatever TCP port we're connecting to, then that we consider that a good test. So it's just a very basic, is that port available? We don't send any data across it, but we do record, how long it takes to connect to that service. So that's good for testing access to or availability of, things like mail servers or those sorts of network services that, can be running on any port. We just do a quick test to make sure that it is listening and available. So also good for testing, routing, general network connectivity, right? And then we have a IP telephony tests, which will actually make a IP telephony call either to another phone or another local manager. So we actually include either a voice payload or there's different tones you can do for testing it as well, different megahertz or hertz tones. And then we collect a whole bunch of information off of that, to sort of validate the call quality. So, latency, jitter, that sort of thing, discarded packets. We collect a bunch of statistics about that during the call. So, you can, of course, benchmark your VoIP quality, make sure they are meeting SLAs, even when they're under high usage. Or, you can have the Uplogix randomly call SIP-enabled phones to annoy coworkers, right? That was something that was going on quite a bit when we were first testing those systems some years ago. So, here's an example of that, where you have the Uplogix making these VoIP calls across different network segments, right? So that they're actually, benchmarking performance between different sites with as opposed to, centralized testing, which is only going to be testing certain segments of the network. So a standard call from, a remote office that might go across a satellite link or the broadband, whatever it might be, and then maybe through a VPN as well. By using the Uplogix to test this, we can kind of get an end-to-end test, from your operations center or wherever to, different clinics or hospitals and things like that. In order to just test every segment of it, as opposed to, kind of a hub and spoke centralized test. We can call from, different endpoints to different endpoints sideways across the network, as it were. So, what we do is we just, use the Uplogix to test the same path that, your users are going to be using for their IP telephony calls, is the idea there. So when you're, planning this out, just like with the rest of our monitoring, you want to take a moment to figure out, what you want to test and how you want to set that up. The difference between doing this on the CLI and in the GUI is just that if you're doing this in the CLI, you can kind of immediately test things and get immediate feedback. Setting these things up in the control center, you get a little more data validation, so it's a little more user-friendly in the control center, but a little more responsive in the CLI, basically. So, if you want to configure those on the command line, you just config SLV, and then you tell it what type of test, and then you give it a name. Each test has to have a unique name. And then, of course, you can use show and question mark for help while you're in the editor. So here's an example, creating an HTTP test. This one's very simple. Just config SLV. That's going to be an HTTP test, and we're calling it to Uplogix. And so that opens up a little editor where we tell it what URL we want to test to. In this case, uplogix.com. And then, exit to get out of the editor. You can then, run that test right away if you want. You just run show SLV stats, give it the test name, and then use the -X to have it run that test one time right away. So that'll test it, show you what the current response is from that test and so forth. Ipt Telephony Tests, they have a couple more elements you have to define. Like I said, you can have different voice payloads. There are different codecs that the IP telephony calls can make. But similar, you just config SLV IPT and give it a name. And then if you want to have it run that test right away, just use show SLV stats -X. Once you've defined those tests, you can run them once, but usually we want to have the Uplogix do this testing, right? So you use config monitor at the system level, and that'll let you configure an SLV monitor where it's going to run that test, on whatever schedule you define. So in this example, we're doing config monitor SLV, and we tell it to test the to Uplogix SLV test every 60 seconds. That's what that :60 is there. So every minute, we're going to check that the website is available, and if it's not, we're going to record that in the logs there. So you can also do that from the control center, of course. It's part of the automation menu on the left. You can configure these tests at the inventory level or at the individual local manager level. And you just select add to create a new one. And then you get to tell it, do we want to make this an HTTP, IPT, or TCP test? Give it a name, fill in the destination or the endpoint for that test, and then click save. Once they've been created, you can also schedule those from the control center GUI, right? Use the schedule task button, or you can go to the tasks and filters tab to schedule these en masse. But once you go to schedule task, you're going to select SLV monitor, select whichever test you want to use, and then you can add whatever rule you want to evaluate that test data there. If you want, in this case, we're doing a time to connect evaluation with this rule here. If that time to connect's over a certain amount, probably that rule set is going to give us an alarm. Once you've selected the test and your rules, you go ahead and hit next, and it'll let you schedule that test. You know, with the monitors, again, usually they're a repeating job, but you can set that at whatever frequency you want. You know, Ipt Telephony Tests, we recommend doing every 15 minutes or so, rather than 30 seconds like most of our monitors. And then, you know, it'll go ahead and start that job whenever on whatever schedule you select there. Like I said, you know, those IPT telephony calls can be to a handset or they can be to another local manager. They can be configured to listen for those incoming calls and then answer them. You just use the config system IPT from the command line. That's going to let you select some parameters for how it answers the phone, right? You know, you have to tell it to listen. But by default, we'll listen for 30 seconds to up to 10 simultaneous endpoints. And we will send back a particular voice payload. You select that when you configure that. So that'll have the Uplogix talking both ways over the IPT telephony call, both from the originating test unit and from the unit that is picking up those calls. So you get a full duplex conversation going that way. That's also enabled from the control center. That also lives under automation. There's IPT settings where you can tell them, you know, to listen or not. And then of course, you can set IP filters for that as well as the other parameters. If you only want it to answer calls from certain endpoints, that's how you do it right there. So like, you know, like I was saying, we no more than 5-minute frequency, 30-second call. That, you know, gives you a good idea of voice quality. And then you can also create a blank rule that does nothing, but that you can schedule. And then once you kind of get a benchmark for what call quality is like and what's average and standard, you can then modify the rule that's already attached to that monitor to, you know, alarm if it goes over a certain threshold and so forth. So it's a good practice there. Once you've got those SLV tests running, the results show up on the left-hand menu under SLV stats. If you just click through to there, it'll show you all the different tests that you have running on that system. And if you select one, it'll go ahead and show you all the data we're collecting from that. We'll chart it out, but there's also a table view at the bottom that you can expand if you want to look at the actual numbers in a chart form. And then of course that can all be downloaded in a CSV file for Excel if you need to you know, export that data and do something with it. Here's the TCP test. You'll notice it's got, you know, just time to connect in milliseconds for that. That's the only statistics we collect from that. And then, you know, here's an IP telephony test with a bunch of the different statistics that we collect from that, including, you know, jitter, latency, burst, and then the MOS, which is the average quality score for the call overall. That data, you know, of course, can be exported. We were talking about this in the alerting section earlier, but if you use the export section on the Uplogix configuration menu there, you can have that data exported off via SCP or FTP to a file server. If you want to have some other software analyze that information, that can be a good way to go about that. Of course, you can view the tests themselves by just doing show SLV test and the name of the test. Of course, asterisk works there. If you want to look at the statistics from the tests, you'd need to run show SLV stats and then tell it which test you want to see. And there's a couple different options. You can, you know, get verbose output from that, or with the -X, it'll run the test immediately and show you the results of that one run. So yeah, most of this stuff lives under the automation section here, right? That's where we can, configure it to listen for incoming VoIP calls, right? We'll just set this up to allow incoming calls from anywhere. And then if you want to define those SLV tests, that's under the SLV section there. When you hit add here, we can do a simple test. In fact, I'm gonna set a test up to verify that the control center is available. So we'll just call it UCC test, keep it simple, and do an HTTP test to that IP. I don't think I need all of this stuff, but let's try it with just the IP. And if I hit save then, so there we have it, a test of our ability to connect to the control center. And then, like I said, we can use rules to kind of evaluate what happens when we do those tests. I'm going to just make a quick, we'll call it a HTTP fail. And for our conditions here, and we'll go into more detail with this stuff in the next section, but we're going to be looking at our SLV, time to connect, and if that equals 0, that means that the test failed. So I'm just going to add that condition. Right now, this rule doesn't take any action, but if it fails to connect, well, actually, I might as well have it go ahead and create an alarm when that happens. And we're just going to add that. So if I hit save, then that's going to, I now have a new rule. Oh, it was actually on that previous page, called HTTP fail. So then if you want to schedule that, the easiest way is going to be the schedule button in the control center. You just select your SLV monitor in this case. Go next. So we've only got one test defined, so that's our UCC test. And I'm going to add that HTTP fail rule to it. We could have done that from this picker here, but got it in clipboard. So if I just hit next here, and I schedule that to run, I don't want it to run once. I would like to do, we're going to do that every 30 seconds. Really want to make sure that this test is available. And we're going to call it, this is going to be the UCC HTTP test. I hit save there. It'll go ahead into the queue. I can look at the scheduled tasks on the left here. I've got this UCC HTTP test. Now the Uplogix, is going to pick that up during its heartbeat on a 30-second interval. So of course, right now it's saying pending. But if I want to, we can SSH on over there and kind of watch things as they happen live. Those stats, once they get collected, I need this password again, they're going to be sent up to the control center as part of the archive process, which again, by default, that's a 1 hour, an hourly job. Show SLV test start. So there's our test. And then if we want to show SLV stats, HTTP, what do I call it? UCC test. You can see it's run that test once, and for whatever reason, this this local manager is getting a 302 not found, or no, sorry, that is found. So no actual data coming across from that right now, it looks like. And then of course, if I want to, I can do -X to have it run that test right away. And there it goes again. We now have a couple 3 data points. This is some interesting response from this website though. So that's SLV tests in a nutshell. The good network tests that are available as a licensed feature. And yeah, you can configure and view them both in the control center and on the CLI. So the next section I'd like to go into for the second half today is the custom rules section. And, we were just touching on that. And of course, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday. Um, we did some basic rules stuff, but this is just to kind of dig a little deeper into the automation engine that we have. There we go, custom rules. So, you know, we have some built-in rules, but of course, you can create your own, right? These allow you to, develop automation beyond what's already built into the Uplogix. Oops. So again, the custom rules let you extend the existing automation in the Uplogix. You already have some rules like the interface basic rules that can be, changed as needed if you, want to change the benchmarks for any of those alarms or anything like that. And we can also help you to develop new rules. We have a number of examples available on the support site for different systems we've created rules for. But if you ever need to, build out some automation for something, we can help you out. Our professional services department, that's mainly Matt and myself, are available to help out with creating and testing that sort of stuff. Of course, there's an editor available both on the local manager and in the control center. And as you know, those rules are evaluated as part of the monitors that we run. And finally, we do have a user guide to rules and monitors that goes into a lot of depth about how everything works specifically. If if you guys are looking to create some automation, I can get that to you. We have that available for download. So as you know, all rules need a name. They have an optional description. I like to use that to document what each rule does, just kind of to help keep track of the logic of the more complex rule sets. And then each rule has some actions that it takes. It can be multiple actions or just a single one. And then each rule also has some conditions that trigger it. So with that, whatever those conditions are, whenever they're true, then the actions that are part of that rule take place. And of course, you can use your standard programming kind of Boolean and or XOR stuff to combine multiple conditions to target more, specific things that are going on. So, rules can take a bunch of different actions. The most common thing we see are either just event or alarms. Maybe we see something happen that we just want to log that it happened. That's what the events are for. Alarms are more like, we think this is a problem and people should be notified. And then the alarms and alerts are really the same thing. If users are subscribed, then they will get an email about those alarms. The rules can also take automated operations, right? A number of different things that they can do either on the device that they're working on or a different device, or maybe on the local manager. So that's, that could be, things like clearing interfaces or maybe running a command, right? We also have the ability to display a status on the Uplogix dashboard. So, on a lot of those systems, you'll notice that we have this, if we go to an individual port, these will say status okay, right? Or if they go into Ronmon, this will say Ronmon here, right? And so you can use the rules engine to write different status messages to that status field. And those also show up on the dashboard when you log in. So, if you have one example is we had satellite antennas that were not locked. It's the equivalent of layer 1 problem, right? Or a port's been unplugged, right? That sort of thing. We can write that status to the dashboard so that you can see at a glance what's going on. And then the rules can also manipulate variables. So the rules engine has these, you can create internal variables to either store data that we get from running commands, or you can use it to kind of create state variables to keep track of the logic of a complex rule set. Maybe it's got 10 steps that it needs to execute. You can use these variables to keep track of what step you're on. and then, execute them in the correct order and so forth. So here's all the different rules actions that you can take. It's things like I said, like clearing counter, or maybe, manipulating an interface on a router or switch. If you have integrated power distribution units, we can, power cycle devices, or just issue a reboot on their command line, right? If we're working with the Cisco, where our advanced driver knows how to do that, you can have a rule that, will reboot a system under certain circumstances. Same with all the backup and restore operations. You can push and pull configurations or OS images with the rules engine. And also, probably most useful, you can have it just execute a command and then look for certain responses. And that's where most of the really powerful automation stuff takes place. Again, with those variables, you can either clear them, you can set a value, or you can increment or decrement them, right? So you might have a counter that you're watching for an error, and once you see it 10 times, you want to do a thing. So that's what those sort of state variables can be used for. And then if you are connected to a service processor, like a ILO DRAC kind of system, our rules engine knows how to interact with those to, power things on and off or power cycle them. So the rules engine can do that if need be. Now, so for the conditions, we're collecting those mostly from monitors, and that's kind of what this variable stuff is. That's, where are we getting the data that we're analyzing? So, you might have, CPU or memory in a chassis monitor that we're collecting from a system. It might be a message in the console log coming across. It could be any of the different statuses of a interface for Ethernet, and so forth and so on, including, Pulse, that's our network test that we use to control our out-of-band system, that sort of stuff. So this is all the different data inputs we can use to trigger our rules. Again, system, terminal, SLV data, we can use all of that data to drive our rules engine. Now with those conditions, maybe you don't want to trigger a rule until you've seen a problem for a certain amount of time. And so that's how we use these condition inputs. So when you define a condition that triggers a rule, you can add, an interval that's seconds, minutes, hours, and then a number. And so that condition won't be true until we've seen it for the specified amount of time. So maybe, you don't want to send an alert until we've seen the problem for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. That's how we control that with the intervals. And then again, you can use the OR and XOR to combine those conditions, standard sort of a way. We also have the ability to trigger or not trigger actions if we've run a certain thing in a certain amount of time. So, if we've power cycled a device, maybe we don't want to power cycle it again unless it's been 15 minutes. So that's how we use these has run conditions. And then, of course, we can trigger off of the variables. So if you're using some sort of, counter to keep track of what's going on in an automated process, we can trigger based on that. Again, those variables can be, pretty much anything you want, right? They're, you give it a name and you can put text or numbers in there. It's not very fiddly like, old Pascal days or anything like that. But those variables do have a scope. So when you define a variable and put a piece of data in that can either be restricted to just the monitor that it's running in, or it can be available system-wide. And so, the usage for that is, if you're monitoring an interface, and, doing variables, maybe you're monitoring interfaces on multiple ports and multiple systems. You want to keep those discrete to their individual monitors, probably. But then if you have some more complex automation where maybe, when something happens on the router on port 11, we want to do something on the switch on port 12, that's when we want those system-wide variables that lets us kind of pass data and control activity between multiple ports on the Uplogix there. Again, when you're defining this sort of stuff, we want to figure out, what are we looking to accomplish with these rules? What are we monitoring, and what do we want to do when we see that stuff happen? On the command line, you just use config rule and give it a name. It's then going to walk you through a kind of editor where you can define the conditions and everything. Question mark is your friend in that as well, of course. Here we are on the command line, just creating that rule, defining the action, which is just an alarm, and then defining a condition that triggers it, right? In this case, if line protocol status goes down, then we've got a alarm that's gonna send that condition red message. So once you want to run that rule, you have to attach it to a monitor. So we pick a device, in this case a router probably, and we'd run config monitor. We tell it it's an interface monitor, and then we tell it which interface to monitor, Ethernet 00 in this case. And then, yeah, condition red is the rule name, so we attach that. And as soon as we run it, we can see we start to get an alarm based on the line protocol status being down on that particular interface. Now, mostly when I'm creating rules initially, I'll do it in the GUI because it is a little more user-friendly. It's broken up into 3 sections, just like kind of in our editor. You've got the information, the conditions, and the actions. So this is the condition editor. You saw me messing with this just a little bit in that last section. I just created a quick rule just by picking from the available monitor data, right? In this case, this one's that same line protocol status from the interface monitors. And then when we see that it equals down, that's going to trigger this rule. Here is the a very zoomed out screenshot of the actions section. And at the very bottom of that, we've got the alarm and events, which again, the alarm is probably the thing that people use the most there. You can specify the message that it's going to have, and then you can specify that whether or not this alarm should go out via email to subscribed users. You can have rules that are have that email feature disabled. If you want to look at them, you just click on the rules link on the left-hand side, and you can open up with little black triangles to review them. We also have, you can delete them, of course. Just select the rule, hit remove. If you want to do that on the command line, you have to give it config rule no, and then the rule name. It's a lot like kind of Cisco command line in that case. And you can also, I need to add a slide for this, I can see, but you can also promote the rules. I go back to that Uplogix level. We have the rules on the left here and the rule sets. In this case, I have this HTTP fail test. I can actually take this rule and I can promote it. I can copy it off this local manager, and I can promote it either to an inventory group. Well, in which case we just have the one inventory group. At that point, you can tell it to force update on children. That will, push this rule basically to every Uplogix in that group. And so then this will exist on that other local manager at that point, and also in the inventory. Once I hit that promote to group, you can see if I go to your company and I go to automation and rules, I now have this one user-defined rule in the hierarchy, and now any new local managers will inherit this rule, and like I said, I had it pushed to this other local manager, and so it should also exist here now. There we are, the HTTP fail test, or rule rather. So that's rule promotion, which is very useful. Now, when you are running these rules, if something doesn't seem to be going right, we can turn on some logging for that. That's just done at the port level or the system level, wherever you are. Config log rule enable. We'll turn that on, and then it'll start doing some logging that you can review with show log rule. it'll show you, as it's evaluating the rule, what conditions it evaluated, whether they were true or not, and then any actions that are taken. That's all going to be logged in there, including, what's being put in variables and that sort of stuff. It can be really useful when you're trying to create some custom automation, just to give you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. Let's build on that kind of condition red rule that we were looking at. I'm going to go ahead and create a rule for you guys here that goes ahead and uses that write status feature to display a message on these local managers. And I'm going to do it at the company level just so that it can be on both systems. So this will be, down. So this is going to, if we go to our conditions area here, we just select from here interface. And then these are all the different, pieces of data we collect for an interface. In this case, we wanted to do administrative status equals down. And then if I click add condition, there it is. It appears in the conditions section here. And then we want to write status to that port right here. Select write status. What's our message going to be? We're going to do ISP down and add action, and then hit save. And that rule should go ahead and propagate to the other ones, but I'm just going to go ahead and, oh no, wait, we can't promote it to ourselves, can we? Well, that's fine. So if I go back to that local manager there, we have this new rule named link down. And so if I just go ahead and SSH back on over here, and log in, I can configure that as part of the monitor. Let's see here. Mostly I was working on port 2.9 if I recall. And I have a monitor, nope, none running right now. If I look at our running config, I believe, yeah, Gigabit Ethernet 1 is shut down. So if I configure a new monitor, an interface monitor on Gigabit Ethernet 1, using my link down rule to analyze that data, we'll validate that right now. So it's going to test it immediately. That's going to run show interface, and ideally that link down rule is going to create an alarm, or rather it's going to trigger that write status where it will show me on the port level a message that says ISP down. Just give it a moment to think about that. There we go. You can see here in the GUI, we're now having that ISP down displayed in our status, and of course that shows up on these cards as well here. You can see right here, it's showing us that. Now, of course, that rule didn't include an alarm condition, so it's not actually creating an alarm, but we are nevertheless, displaying this message. You might have, we have a rule set, for example, on the F5s, the load balancers, that will display whether or not they're in active or standby mode. So that can be the kind of thing that we like to see that. And see, there we are right here on the port level as well, ISP down. And then, if I were to log in, when I first log in, that's going to be showing right there on our dashboard, letting us know that, that link is down on that router. Schedule as interface, turn off that interface, and we can look at it in there.